G'day and welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. If you haven't been here before, I'm a retired Kiwi bloke who's living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico. And in today's video we're going to be talking about the 2024 Rugby Championship that's going to get underway on August the 9th. Yes, I've decided in the next series of videos I'm going to talk about each of the teams that are competing in this year's 2024 Rugby Championship competition. Have a look at how their year's going so far. Add a few of my comments in there and get to see what you're thinking about this year's competition as well. So let's get right into it right now. G'day everyone and welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, welcome. It's great to have you on board. And if you're a regular viewer of my channel, welcome back. It's always great to have you here. Don't forget to leave your comments under this video. I always enjoy reading those. Well, 99.9% of them anyway. But always great to have you here. And if you're a first timer, we're building a fantastic global rugby community here on this channel. So come along and be part of it. The best way to do that, of course, is hit the subscribe button and give this video some love. So what I decided to do over the next few videos is to talk about the Rugby Championship competition this year. Look at each of the teams in a separate video, talk about how they're travelling so far this year, give my thoughts around that, look at the squad that they've selected for the Rugby Championship, and we can all have our say around that. So in today's video I'm going to be talking about the South African Springboks. Have a look at their season so far this year and give my thoughts around that. So let's get straight into it. Now, of course, the Springboks opened their campaign in 2024 with a game against Wales that took place at Twickenham in London, and it was a pretty interesting occasion as well, because we thought that the Springboks were going to come out, put a lot of points on Wales, which they did in the end. But I think we can summarise that game, well, I'm going to summarise that game by saying I thought the Springboks were a little bit rusty, and there was a few combinations, expectedly so I think, in that game that needed a little bit more game time. So it was a good run for the Springboks. They got on top of Wales in the end. Wales were quite defiant at different times throughout that game, but of course they've been having their troubles ever since as a team. The Springboks, on the other hand, it was a good starting point. It was a benchmark, I guess, that game, and it was an opportunity for Rassie to see some of those players and see how they played. And one of the interesting things for me going forward in this season was going to be to see how Rassie managed the team selection, because now, as we're still 3 years out of the Rugby World Cup in 2027 in Australia, it's going to be really interesting to see what players get an opportunity to step up into the big time. And the question mark for me is how many of those players will get an opportunity during the Rugby Championship? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? So a comfortable win for the Springboks in that first game of the year against Wales by winning 41 points to 13. And then next up was that much anticipated series against Ireland. Yes, Ireland travelling to South Africa to play a two-game series against the Springboks, and this was going to be really, really interesting. Everybody was on the edge of their seat to see how this one would pan out, and the Springboks got home in the first game that took place in Pretoria by 27 points to 20. It was a pretty close affair once again, as it is between these two teams, but it was great to see the world #1 ranked team up against the ranked #2 team. And it was a very, very exciting game, particularly for a neutral who was watching from afar. So the Springboks got the best of Ireland in that particular one. I thought that was a very important game for Rassie and his team from an emotional point of view. They wanted to put Ireland away. They had trouble, of course, with Ireland in the Rugby World Cup, but they went on to win the Rugby World Cup. So that was a good game for the South Africans, I thought, psychologically. And then the second game in the series, well, Ireland had nothing to lose and they really wanted to put it out there. And what an exciting game it was. And it came down to that last minute, didn't it? That drop goal by Frawley from Ireland, getting them the win in that game by 1 point, winning 25 points to 24. But again, it was another one of those games that could have gone either way. It was in the balance right up to the last minute, and it was an absolutely spectacular game of rugby for a purist, and that's how I was looking at it. So a great win for South Africa in the first game, a great win for Ireland in the second game, and that was the first loss for the South African Springboks in 6 games. So it brought to the end that winning streak that Rassie and his team were on. Now, what was this going to do to the Springboks team? Well, next up was Portugal, and I think Portugal were going to find out how much that loss against Ireland really counted. Down and reflect on that game against Portugal, a couple of things that came out of for me that I thought were quite interesting was, first of all, Portugal scored 21 points against South Africa in that game. Now, Australia, Argentina, Wales and England haven't been able to do that against the Springboks in their last outing against the Boks. So it was interesting to see that Portugal were able to put 21 points on the South African team. And I know a lot of people will say, yeah, okay, it was a B team or a C team from South Africa, but the reality is that a B team and a C team from South Africa is still a very, very strong rugby team. And at the end of the day, Portugal had to get across the line and score those points, and they did it against the Springboks team. So that was a pretty impressive thing. But overall, I thought we saw South Africa clicking into gear in this game. They scored a lot of tries. They scored some very good tries. And they had some breakout performances as well from Sasha Feinberg. Of course, he came on for Manny Lebok in that game. Not only did he kick for goal very well, but he was also brilliant in general play. And of course, the internet lit up about Sasha after that game, quite rightly so. He's a very, very exciting prospect for the Springboks team. So where does this leave us now? The Springboks have had one loss so far this season, 3 wins against good competition, and they're heading into another level of competition now against the Rugby Championship teams, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they go. So Rassie has named the squad that he's put together as we move forward to this Rugby Championship. The Springboks are going to start their campaign on August the 9th in Australia. They've got 2 games against Australia. The first one's going to be played at Allianz Stadium, and the second one's going to be played at Optus Stadium over there in Perth. So they're going to be halfway on the way home when they travel across Australia for that second game. So an interesting aspect of the Rugby Championship this year is that South Africa are going to be on the road to start off with. They've got those 2 games against Australia. Joe Schmidt's team, of course, have had a winning start to this campaign so far this year. They've got 2 wins against Wales. They've got that win against Georgia, and they're looking to see what they can do in terms of measuring themselves against the World Championship team when they come to Australia at the beginning of August. So let's have a look at Rassie's squad that he's put together so far for the Rugby Championship, and I'll just have a few comments around that as well. Okay, so looking at the forwards first of all that Rassie has named in the squad, and we've got Grobler, Monami, Marks, Oxenshea, Steenkamp, Thomas de Toit, Vincent Koch, Frans Maherber, Johan Wessels, Eben Etzebeth, Morat, Norkie, Snyman, Jason Dixon, Peter Steph de Toy, Sia Kolesi, Lowe, Van Staden and Quagga Smith. So a really versatile, flexible, interchangeable bunch of forwards there, and it's going to be really interesting to see what Rassie does with his team selection for that first game against Australia. Are some of those players on the peripheral going to get an opportunity? I'll talk about that in a minute, but let's have a look at the backs that Rassie has selected for this squad. Okay, looking at the backs that Rassie has selected, 3 halfbacks in the squad, Reinach, Vanderberg and Williams. Very good selections there. 3 number 10s, we've got Feinberg, Pollard and Lebok. And then in the centres we've got Arm, Dialandi and Jesse Creel. And then Rassie has selected 5 players that can play in the backs, in the back 3. And they are Arenza, Fassi, Colby, Leroux and Mapimpi. So a fantastic backline there as well. Some really interesting selections. I think we're looking at the future of the South African team here with the likes of Fassi coming in to be able to play fullback for Willie Leroux if there's an injury there or something happens to Willie Leroux. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get to see Fassi play against Australia. It could be one of those selections that comes out of the blue for me. And very, very entertaining he is. And I think he went very well against Portugal as well. And he brings another dynamic to that backline. But Willie Leroux, of course, is the rock of Gibraltar for South Africa at the back. And reads the game so well, knows exactly what to do at the right moment. And that's going to be one of the interesting selections for me. Now, looking at the rest of the backs, you know, a lot of them picked themselves. I think we're seeing Lucano Arm come back into some very good form at the moment. Thought he played very, very well against Portugal, scored that fantastic try, and going to be interesting to see what way Rassie decides to go in the midfield, and we've seen fantastic play from Damien Diolandi and Jesse Creel over the last number of games for the Springboks, and of course in that final last year against the All Blacks. So it's going to be hard to break up those two. Then moving on to the number 10, and this is where it gets really exciting for me for South Africa, because we've got some really interesting choices now, don't we? We've seen Sasha come in and play so brilliantly in the game against Wales and then against Portugal, and he's shown his flair, but he's also shown his consistency off the kicking tee. And this has been a big thing, particularly when we've seen Manny Lebok being a little bit vulnerable in that particular area of his game. Me, the way that I would go with this is that I would have Pollard on the bench, and I would have Sasha starting the game against Australia. And the reason I say that is because I think South Africa can open up the Australian defence and score some points and get out to a healthy lead. And then to having someone like Pollard, who is another rock of Gibraltar, who can be brought on at any time during the game if things go a little bit south or you need that kicking expertise in the game, then Pollard is a good one to bring on for that. Alternatively, you could do it the other way. Get Pollard on, steady the ship, get points on the board, and then bring Sasha on at some time in the second half. I think Manny Lebok's going to be missing out in terms of game time squad for this South African team. I think that Sasha has shown enough that's really excited Rassie and the coaching team, and I think that's going to be an area where we see a bit of change for South Africa moving ahead in the Rugby Championship this year. Got no Faf de Klerk, he's out injured, so it's going to be interesting. I would pick Grant Williams to start the game. The reason is I think Williams' speed is fantastic, but I think it's an opportunity for Rassie to give him more game time so he can work on his defence. I think it's a well-known fact that Grant Williams needs to step up his defence. He's nowhere near as good as Faf de Klerk at the moment in the defensive area. So I think giving him some game time would be a good ploy on behalf of Rassie and the team. So I'd see Grant Williams starting and then seeing Reinhardt come off the bench. Now in the forwards, this is where it gets really interesting for me when it comes to the Springboks. First of all, in the front row, I think we're going to see some changes there for the Australian game. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw the likes of Thomas du Toit starting there. I think he played brilliantly well against the Portugal team, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him there, or at least on the bench for that particular game. I think as far as the locks go, I think we're going to see an interesting selection there. As of course we've got Etzebeth in there, but we've got no Franco Mostert in this team for the Springboks. So it's going to be interesting to see what way Rassie goes with the locks in this game. Etzebeth is a foot in for me, but I'm not too sure who's going to go with the other one. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen from a locking point of view for South Africa. And then moving into the back three for the South Africans and the forwards, I think this is going to be another area of selection interest that we're going to see from Rassie. But for me, it's got to be Peter Steph du Toit, Sia Kolesi and Kwagga Smith at number 8. And I think that experiment of putting Kwagga Smith at number 8 has gone pretty well for South Africa. I think his speed off the back, particularly from a defensive point of view, is very important. And coming up against these big trios in the back three for the Rugby Championship, we've got the likes of Rob Valetini for Australia, who's playing outstanding rugby at the moment. We've got the likes of Ardie Savea for New Zealand, and we've got the likes of Lamaro for Argentina, which is going to pose a big problem to the South Africans in the back three. So I think Kwagga Smith's speed is going to be very important, particularly in the breakdown area, but also off those inside channels of defence, and I think that's why Kwagga Smith at number 8 is a good selection. Again, let me know in the comments what you think as far as the number 8 selection goes for the South Africans. So of course I'll be back making more videos when the Springboks name that first team to play against the Australians in Australia. I think what's really exciting for me in the series is that the Springboks are going to Australia first to play against the Australians. They're going to have those 2 games before they go back home and take on the All Blacks, which I think is going to be the highlight of this year's Rugby Championship, of course. And the All Blacks got 2 games in South Africa, which is going to be incredibly interesting. We've had Ireland go there. We're now going to see New Zealand go there and see what they can do against the Springboks. So the Springboks are going to have an opportunity to put 2 games together in Australia, a 23-man squad that I think Rassie is going to stick with against the All Blacks, and he's going to want to see those combinations working and firing, and particularly from the bench. And are we going to see the bomb squad come into this game against the Australians? That's going to be another interesting aspect for me. But it's going to be an interesting game for number 10s for me against Australia. I don't think Australia's got strength in that position at the moment. And I think South Africa are going to be able to exploit that. And I think that's where their attacking opportunities are going to come. I'll talk more about that in a preview video for that game against Australia when the two teams are announced. So there we go. South Africa so far this year, 3 wins, 1 loss. That loss against Ireland in that epic encounter in South Africa. I think South Africa are building very nicely into this season. I think those 2 games against Australia are going to set them up very nicely for the Rugby Championship in what I think will be the 2 decisive games of the Championship this year against the New Zealand All Blacks back in South Africa. So there you go, there's my first video in the series that I'm making about the Rugby Championship this year, looking back at the 4 teams' performances so far in the 2024 season. I'd love you to follow my journey. The best way to do that is to hit the subscribe button and come along with me. I'll be back again really soon with another video on one of the other teams and how they've been travelling so far this year in their rugby encounters, and looking at how I think they're going to perform in the Rugby Championship in 2024. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching my videos. If you like me and you're going to absorb yourself in the Olympic Games, which are starting today in Paris, then good luck to you. Enjoy that. I'm not going to be doing any videos on the Rugby Sevens. I'm not too big into the Sevens. I want to stick to my international rugby videos. So that's what you're going to get right here on Inside Rugby with Mark. But I'll be back soon with some more content. Until then, you stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying your rugby, no matter where you are in the world. And it's time to say adios from beautiful Mexico for now. Until next time, bye for now.